Hello and welcome. I'm James Azimoha. You're watching A News. First, the headlines. The U.S. is launching what it calls an economic D-Day against Iran as Tehran threatens to stop oil exports from the Gulf. Oil prices are falling ahead of Washington's announcement of sweeping new tax sanctions on Iran. And Syria and Israel have held U.S.-mediated talks in Jordan, seeking to de-escalate tensions after recent Israeli strikes. Welcome now. The United States and Iran have exchanged new threats as Washington prepares to announce what it calls the largest financial pressure campaign ever imposed on Tehran.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is expected to unveil additional economic sanctions targeting Iran and countries that continue trading with it later today. The measures come as Iran warns it could halt all oil exports from the Gulf if what it calls an economic war continues. Iranian official Mohsen Rezai said Tehran would not allow a single drop of oil to be exported through the Strait of Hormuz or anywhere in the Persian Gulf if economic pressure increases. He also warned that countries supporting U.S. sanctions could be viewed as participating in an act of war. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi dismissed the threat of the new measures, calling them a sign of desperation. He described them as a continuation of what he called Washington's maximum pressure policy and urged the United States to pursue dialogue instead. This is a repetitive scenario, from the crippling sanctions imposed during the Obama administration to the maximum pressure campaign during Mr. Trump's first administration, and now to the latest sanctions. All of these measures have been introduced under different titles, but they represent the same kind of bullying that we have always seen in American policy. Meanwhile, Iran's state-controlled Persian Gulf Strait Authority has warned that vessels accused of violating its transit rules in the Strait of Hormuz could face penalties, including fines, detention, or confiscation. Fewer than 20 commodity vessels transited the narrow waterway over the weekend, according to shipping data, as Iranian and U.S. restrictions continue to limit traffic through the key energy route. It remains one of the world's most important oil transit corridors, with at least 20% to 25% of global energy shipments passing through it. The latest developments come as Tehran and Washington remain locked in a broader confrontation, with diplomatic efforts showing little progress.
Iran has ruled out the visit of Pakistan's army chief as part of mediations between Tehran and Washington. Tehran says talks with Asim Munir will instead focus on issues of mutual interest between the two neighboring countries, as well as regional developments.
Iran's foreign ministry has rejected reports that Pakistan's army chief Field Marshal Asim Munir's visit to Tehran will be about mediation with the United States. Spokesman Ismail Baqai stressed at a weekly press conference on Monday that the trip follows an agenda on fostering bilateral cooperation as well as discussing the latest regional developments. He said that the status of navigation at the Strait of Hormuz is also on the agenda because of Pakistan's interest in the strategic waterway, being a littoral state at the Sea of Oman. The Iranian official also welcomed Bulgaria's move to withdraw U.S. military aircraft tankers from its territory following Tehran's protest to Sofia. When asked about remarks by the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian suggesting an end to the war would be when Iran is at the best position, the spokesman said his statement did not mean accepting Washington's conditions. He added that the newly formed trilateral security pact between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey shows there is serious concern in the region over Israeli and U.S. policies in the Middle East. Meanwhile, Baqai confirmed that several signatories had approached Tehran for joint security arrangements in the region. The foreign ministry spokesman also ruled out reports that the Strait of Hormuz is open to traffic. Turaj Shiralilu from Iranian Foreign Ministry for A News.
Oman's foreign minister is traveling to Tehran on Tuesday for high-level talks with Iranian officials. Badir Absaidi will meet his Iranian counterpart, Abbas Araghchi, to discuss bilateral ties and regional issues. Iran's foreign ministry says the visit is part of ongoing political consultations between the two nations. Both countries are littoral states of strategic Strait of Hormuz. Tehran says the diplomatic push is aimed at bolstering peace and stability across the region. Now, Pakistan's Army Chief General Asim Munir will visit Tehran on Monday as part of efforts to promote peace and security in the region. Munir is expected to discuss the peace process and possible new U.S. sanctions on Iran. The visit comes as Tehran warns it could respond militarily. Washington says it's preparing what it calls the toughest sanctions in history. Meanwhile, oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz have slowed down as Tehran threatens to strike tankers attempting to pass without authorization. Now let's talk to Dr. Desiree Kim, Middle East expert and CEO of Future Focus MENA, join us from Bonn, Germany. Good to have you, Doctor.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, the fighting has eased, but the U.S. and Iran still appear far apart. What is keeping this conflict stuck?
Well, the main reason is that the reduction in military activity has not resolved any of the underlying political disputes. Washington still wants far-reaching restrictions on Iran's nuclear program, regional military capacities, and access to international trade. On the other side, Iran, in turn, wants sanctions reliefs and an end to the blockade and recognition of what it considered its legitimate security interests. There's also a fundamental disagreement over the previous memorandum. Iran argues that it provided for a permanent end to the war, while Washington treated it as a temporary arrangement. This ambiguity may initially have helped both sides accept the agreement, but it later became a major source of mistrust. So, what we are seeing is not peace. Direct military escalation has increasingly been replaced by sanctions, blockades, pressure on shipping, and threats against regional partners.
All right, now, Washington is now launching what it calls its toughest economic campaign against Iran. Can sanctions break the stalemate where military pressure has not?
Sanctions can certainly increase the economic costs for Iran, for sure. The new American measures appear designed not only to target Iranian institutions, but also to discourage third countries or banks, shipping companies, and trading card partners from maintaining economic relations with Tehran. However, economic pressure and political effectiveness are not the same thing. Sanctions may weaken Iran's economy without necessarily producing the concessions Washington wants. If Iran's leadership believes that the United States is seeking capitulation rather than a negotiated settlement, Tehran may respond by escalating through the Strait of Hormuz or other regional channels. The sanctions are most effective when they are connected to a specific diplomatic offer and clearly defined concessions in exchange for clearly defined relief. Pressure without exit strategy can empower hardliners or even reduce the political space of compromise.
All right, now, Hormuz remains at the center of the dispute. What is Iran trying to achieve by keeping such tight control over the strait?
Yeah, by keeping such tides open, Iran's primary objective is to convert geography into strategic leverage. Why? Because it cannot match the United States in conventional military or economic power. That's for sure. but it can raise the cost of confrontation for the entire international community by restricting access to one of the world's most important energy corridors. And that is what we are all feeling on the end right now on rising oil prices, for incidents, and even further. Tehran is seeking several things: the relief from the American blockade, protection for Iranian exports, recognition of its role in regulating the strait, and leverage in any future negotiations, or the creation of a new Iranian authority responsible for transit rules is especially important. It suggests that Tehran is trying to institutionalize its control rather than present it merely as a temporary wartime measure. However, Hormuz is both an asset and a vulnerability for Iran. Prolonged disruption also damages Iran's own economy, alienates neighboring states, and increases the likelihood of an international response.
Now, Pakistan's army chief is in Tehran as Islamabad tries to keep mediation going. How significant is Pakistani involvement at this stage?
Well, the involvement of Pakistan's army chief is particularly significant because this is no longer simply a diplomatic dispute. It involves military deterrence, maritime security, and the risk of regional escalation. General Asim Munir can therefore discuss security guarantees and red lines in a way that goes beyond conventional diplomatic messaging. Pakistan also has a direct national interest in preventing further destabilization, though it shares a long border with Iran and would be affected by refugee movements or militant activities, or even disrupted energy markets and greater regional polarization. So its immediate role is probably not to negotiate a comprehensive peace treaty, but to clarify conditions, prevent miscalculation, and determine whether a limited agreement remains possible.
Now, Oman is still trying to find a way to regulate shipping through Hormuz. Could that become the first practical area where Iran and the U.S. can find some common ground?
Yes, maritime access may be the most realistic initial area of common ground. Why? Because it allows both parties to pursue practical interests without resolving every strategic dispute at once. Iran needs some relief from the blockade and wants its role in Hormuz acknowledged, though the US and its partners need predictable and secure shipping. Oman, if we come back to Oman, is particularly well placed to mediate because it shares responsibility for the geography of the strait and has experience facilitating US and Iranian dialogue and is trusted more than many other actors. A limited arrangement could include notification procedures, protected transit corridors, and exemptions for specific cargoes, or communication between naval forces and mechanisms for investigating maritime incidents. Such an agreement would not resolve the nuclear or sanction disputes, but it could reduce the risk of an accidental military confrontation and establish a minimum level of trust, in my view.
Now, speaking about accidental confrontations, Israel and Syria have now resumed U.S. mediated talks after the latest Israeli strikes. Could this help contain another front of the wider regional conflict?
Well, the resumption of talks is important because Syria could easily become another arena in the broader regional confrontation. Continued Israeli strikes risked provoking Syrian response, activating other armed actors, and increasing tensions involving Iran and Turkey. The talks can help if they produce practical arrangements. Military communication channels or geographical limits on operation um, and clearer understandings concerning southern Syria. However, expectations should remain realistic. Syria wants an end to Israeli strikes and a return to previous territorial arrangements, while on the other side, Israel insists on freedom of action against perceived security threats. There is therefore a fundamental conflict between Syrian sovereignty and Israel's doctrine of preventing security. So, to put it like this, the negotiations may not produce political normalization, but even a limited security mechanism could prevent miscalculation and stop Syria from becoming another fully active front.
Now, Iran is warning its neighbors against supporting the new U.S. pressure campaign. How difficult is that becoming for countries in the region to stay out of the conflict?
The warnings are serious because Iran is attempting to deter regional states from providing logistical, financial, or political support to the new American pressure campaign. So Tehran wants to prevent neighboring countries from becoming platforms for economic warfare or future military operations. This places Gulf states in an increasingly difficult position. They depend on American security partnerships, but they also need stable economy and political relations with Iran. So this is a kind of ambiguity situation. Their preferred strategy has generally been hedging, cooperating with Washington while maintaining communication with Tehran. But Iran must also recognize that coercing its neighbors can be counterproductive. The more threatened Gulf states feel, the more likely they are to deepen security cooperations with the United States or with new partners.
Thank you. That was Dr. Desiree Kim, Middle East expert and CEO of Future Focus Manor. Join us from Bonn, Germany. Good to have you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Now, Pakistan is looking to strengthen its trade and energy links with Persian Gulf markets as the disruption around the Strait of Hormuz continues. Maryam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Pakistan is considering adding container ships to its national fleet as disruption around the Strait of Hormuz raises costs for exporters. Pakistan National Shipping Corporation (PNSC) says it is considering acquiring or chartering 3 to 5 feeder vessels. Each would carry between 1,100 and 2,000 containers. But there is no firm timeline yet. PNSC says it will announce details of the expanded regional services in the future. The move comes as freight costs have surged. For Pakistani mango exporters, shipping a refrigerated 40-foot container to Persian Gulf markets now costs up to $8,500. Last year, it cost as little as $1,000. Now exporters estimate mango shipments have fallen by about 50%. However, overall exports have been resilient. Pakistan exported $1.94 billion to GCC states between January and July, up to 2.1% from a year earlier. The disruption is also raising concerns over energy security. Pakistan State Oil says it is exploring wider cooperation with Kuwait Petroleum Corporation in fuel products, refining, storage, terminal shipping, and logistics. For Pakistan, the disruption is putting a pressure on two critical links with the Persian Gulf, moving its exports and securing the energy supplies that keep its economy running. Maryam Sa, A News, Islamabad.
Now, Ukraine and Norway have signed a new defense agreement to expand joint manufacturing in unmanned systems and defense technologies. According to Ukrainian officials, the deal will advance joint projects and deepen defense cooperation. Ukraine's drone deal focuses on sharing combat experience and establishing joint drone production facilities abroad. The drone deal brings together more than 20 international partners, including 15 NATO members, with each agreement lasting 10 years. Norway also announced it will provide $9.2 billion in new aid for Ukraine next year. Now, European leaders have arrived in Kyiv to join Ukraine's Independence Day celebrations, marking 35 years since the country regained independence from the Soviet Union.
Ukraine wants peace, but will not just give in to Russia at any price, President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a defiant speech marking Independence Day celebrations. Joining him at the anniversary were European Council President Antonio Costa, UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham, Luxembourg Prime Minister Luc Frieden, as well as Moldovan President Maia Sandu and Estonian President Alar Karis to the Ukrainian capital. Costa said his visit demonstrates the European Union's unwavering support for Ukraine, adding that the country's struggle is also Europe's struggle. Zelensky also highlighted the role of the country's defense industry, saying it has become a key pillar in strengthening Ukraine's independence. Our naval drones are in action. The enemy had a fleet, and now it is turning into scrap metal. But we must sink more. Our mid-range strikes are cutting their logistics. Our long-range capabilities are cutting their profits. Zelensky said Ukrainian strikes have reached locations including Moscow, Tula, as well as Ryazan, Olenia, and Omsk, adding that Ukraine needs to expand these capabilities further. He also said the Flamingo long-range missiles should become mass-produced rather than a rare weapon. Zelensky also called for stronger pressure on Russia, saying Washington should impose sanctions that would force Moscow to end the war and provide Ukraine with the necessary support. During the visit, Britain is expected to announce the release of classified information on British-made components used in Storm Shadow cruise missiles. The move could help Ukraine establish domestic production of the French-designed Scalp version of the weapon, with Kyiv and Paris aiming to launch a production line by the end of the year. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio reaffirmed Washington's commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty. However, envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner postponed their planned visit after Russian missile and drone strikes on Kyiv last week.
President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine will not pursue an alternative to NATO membership as it seeks firm security guarantees. He said on Sunday that joining the security alliance would give Kyiv greater access to funding and defense cooperation. He said Ukraine needs 30 billion euros in EU loans this year to cover its budget shortfall, as well as $27 billion for defense. The Ukrainian president said the diplomatic window to end the war would last until the summer, but Russia remains unwilling while Kyiv holds the Donbass. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines were damaged by explosions in the Baltic Sea in September 2022. The pipelines were designed to carry Russian gas directly to Germany. The blast prompted an international investigation into who was responsible. 2 Ukrainian nationals are currently in custody over suspected involvement in the explosions. Kyiv has denied any role in the attack. Speaking after the Baltic Nordic Summit in Kyiv on Sunday, President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine was not involved in any operations targeting the pipelines.
Ukraine has never officially taken part in any operations regarding the blowing up of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The issue is not whether someone wants something or not. There is an investigation, and it is currently underway.
Now, drone debris hit a private childcare center in Russia's southern city of Krasnodar. 2 children were killed and 9 others were injured. The attack also sparked a major fire at an ozone logistics hub in the city.
A drone attack in Makhachkala, Dagestan has triggered a fire at Russia's online retailer Ozon's logistics hub. The company said it had also temporarily suspended operations at 2 warehouses in the nearby regions of Stavropol and Adygea amid a drone attack alert. Ozon said the facilities were not damaged. Meanwhile, debris from a drone attack has hit a private childcare center in Russia's southern city of Krasnodar, killing 2 children. 9 other people were injured, including 7 youngsters. Regional Governor Veniamin Kondratyev said the incident happened overnight. Debris also fell on residential buildings while fires broke out at warehouses in the city, including at Russia's online retailer Ozon at its logistics hub. The company said that operations have been suspended. In Russia's Stavropol region, a drone attack on an industrial area in the city of Nevinomysk was repelled, according to Regional Governor Vladimir Vladimirov. Meanwhile, over in Ukraine, a Russian attack on the outskirts of Kharkiv killed 3 people, according to the regional governor. Russian President Vladimir Putin has described Ukraine's strikes on Russian economic targets as the opening of Pandora's box. He said Moscow would respond by targeting Ukraine's most sensitive economic sectors. The comment comes as Ukraine steps up its attacks on logistics hubs and warehouses across Russia, targeting infrastructure it says supports Moscow's war effort. Meanwhile, Kyiv seeks additional air defense interceptor missiles from the United States and Europe to strengthen its air defense capabilities. On Monday, Russia's defense ministry said that it had launched a Soyuz rocket carrying a spacecraft for defense purposes. According to the ministry, the Soyuz 2.1B rocket lifted off from the Plesetsk cosmodrome in northern Russia. The ministry did not provide further details about the spacecraft or its mission.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met Nordic and Baltic leaders in Kyiv on Sunday as the country marked National Flag Day. Leaders from Denmark, Finland, Latvia and Lithuania joined the ceremony, with officials from other Nordic and Baltic countries also visiting the capital. The leaders are due to hold talks with Zelensky as important decisions and announcements are expected. Oil prices fell by more than $1 a barrel on Monday, ahead of an expected U.S. announcement on new sanctions against Iran. The drop comes as investors took profits following 2 consecutive weeks of gains. Brent crude dropped by 1.3% to around $93 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate fell about 1.4% to nearly $86. Both benchmarks gained more than 5% last week as stored talks between Washington and Tehran added to concerns over oil supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Washington and Ottawa are trading threats, tariffs, and sharp words, putting one of the world's biggest trading relationships under new strain. Now, both governments face a difficult choice: return to the negotiating table or risk a deeper economic confrontation.
The United States and Canada are facing a sharp escalation in their trade dispute after talks aimed at resolving tensions collapsed late Friday. US President Donald Trump has accused Canada of seeking the benefits of being a US state without actually being one, while defending new tariffs on Canadian goods. Washington has announced 50% tariffs on around $20 billion worth of Canadian imports, effective immediately. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has described the move as a miscalculation aimed at hurting and dividing Canada. He said the 2 countries were now in a trade war, adding that Canada had been attacked and would respond accordingly. The latest escalation follows what had appeared to be promising negotiations earlier in the week. Both sides now accuse the other of making unacceptable last-minute demands. Trump's latest comments also revive his repeated calls for Canada to become America's 51st state, a proposal firmly rejected by Canadian leaders and widely criticized across the country. U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said Canada would be foolish to think it could win a trade war with the United States. He warned Canada could face serious economic damage and said Carney would likely return to talk soon.
All right, after the break, we'll take a look at other regional or global stories. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching A News. Now, Syria and Israel have held high-level U.S.-mediated talks in Jordan, focusing on halting Israeli strikes on Syrian territory and reviving negotiations on a security agreement. Damascus is demanding that Israeli forces withdraw from positions held before the 8th of December 2024, and that the 1974 disengagement agreement be fully restored. The two sides also discussed ways to prevent tensions between Israel and Turkey from spilling over into Syrian territory. Syrian Foreign Minister Asad al-Shaibani said security talks are expected to resume soon. However, he said mistrust between the two sides remains. At least 30 people have been killed in Guinea after a major rubbish dump collapsed onto a residential area in the capital, Conakry. Authorities say heavy rains triggered the landslide early on Sunday, burying multiple homes under tons of waste.
Search and recovery operations are underway in Conakry in Guinea, where authorities say at least 30 people have been killed after a major landfill collapsed. Emergency crews and local volunteers are using bulldozers to clear the debris and locate missing residents. The disaster occurred around 2 a.m. following torrential rain. A large section of the rubbish dump gave way, pushing directly into homes built alongside the site.
At 2 a.m, we were sleeping when we heard a loud noise. The first ones out, there were 4 or 5 people from the family who went out to see what had happened outside. Suddenly, we saw the first break. This time, the second wave came. That is what knocked us over, pushed the house, and it fell.
The Red Cross and civil protection agencies were deployed to coordinate the emergency response. While rescue teams have managed to pull survivors from the wreckage, officials are managing a high number of casualties.
There are around 30 dead. The bodies have been taken to Donka Hospital and we now have 22 injured. What we must be thankful for is that civil protection found many people under the rubble, bringing out 22 people who are truly injured. For the other bodies, the search continues.
The disaster highlights long-standing safety concerns surrounding the open-air dump. Just days before the collapse, Guinea's government announced plans to permanently close the landfill, citing severe risks during the rainy season. Authorities had scheduled the waste to be relocated outside the capital, but the site remained fully operational when the landslide occurred.
Now, Turkey is strengthening its ties with Islamic countries, with exports showing continued growth in key markets. Trade has increased across several nations, including Egypt, Libya, Syria and Jordan, as Ankara looks to expand its presence in these markets and further boost exports in the coming years.
Turkey's trade with member countries of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC, continued to grow in the first 7 months of this year. According to the Turkish Trade Ministry, Turkey's exports to OIC member states reached $41.5 billion between January and July. That's up $345.7 million, or 0.8% compared with the same period last year. Total foreign trade with OIC countries also increased by 2.2%, reaching $69.2 billion. The OIC brings together 57 member states and represents around a quarter of the world's population. Turkey is now seeking to further expand its commercial ties with these markets. Under its strategy for developing exports with OIC members, the government aims to increase the share of Islamic countries in Turkey's total exports from the current 27% to 30% by 2028. The strategy identifies 21 priority markets, including Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan and the United Arab Emirates, as well as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Morocco and Algeria. Several OIC markets also recorded particularly strong increases in Turkish exports this year. Egypt led the growth, with exports reaching $2.8 billion, up $522.2 million year on year. Exports to Libya rose by $438.5 million to $2.2 billion, while exports to Syria increased by $296.8 million to $2.1 billion. Exports to Jordan also climbed, reaching $1.3 billion, an increase of $227.5 million. The Turkish Trade Ministry says strengthening ties with OIC markets remains a key part of the country's broader export strategy, with the government targeting a larger share of these markets in Turkey's overall foreign trade by 2028.
Now, Turkey has showcased its growing naval power and domestically developed defense technologies at the Technofest Blue Homeland Exposition. Thousands of visitors attended the four-day event at the Gölcük Naval Shipyard in the northwestern province of Kocaeli. Adamora reports from Istanbul.
Turkey's Technofest Blue Homeland Exposition drew thousands of visitors to the Gölcük Naval Shipyard in the northwestern province of Kocaeli over the weekend. The four-day event showcased the country's expanding naval power and its ongoing drive to develop more of its defense technology domestically. Air demonstrations featured maritime patrol aircraft, Seahawk and Super Cobra helicopters, as well as Bayraktar TB2 drones operated by the Turkish naval forces. But the main attractions were at sea. A total of 37 naval vessels and platforms were on display, led by the TCG Anadolu, Turkey's largest warship and the centerpiece of its growing drone carrier capability. Frigates, submarines, support vessels, and the historic presidential yacht, the TCG Savarona, were also presented to visitors. The program included demonstrations by Turkish elite underwater units alongside competitions involving unmanned surface vessels, underwater vehicles, and subsurface rockets. Leading Turkish defense firms also presented air defense, missile, and autonomous maritime systems, including components of Turkey's multi-layered steel dome air defense architecture. This was the second edition of Technofest Blue Homeland, following its debut in Istanbul last year. The event is part of a broader national technology initiative, which aims to reduce reliance on foreign suppliers and encourage young engineers to enter strategically important industries. For Ankara, the event is more than a public technology festival. It's also a demonstration of the country's ambition to become a leading producer and exporter of naval platforms, unmanned systems, and advanced defense technology. This is Adamaro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now, Israeli airstrikes continue across Gaza despite a ceasefire. A strike on a building in central Gaza has killed and injured several people, raising fresh concerns over the future of the pause in fighting.
An Israeli airstrike has destroyed a building in Zawaida in the central Gaza Strip. The incident took place on Sunday. Earlier, the Israeli military had warned the building's residents to leave the area. According to Palestinian health officials, 2 separate airstrikes hit the Gaza Strip. At least 2 people, including a 4-year-old boy, were killed and 7 others were injured. Medics said debris and shrapnel were scattered around the area following the explosion. The 4-year-old Mohammed Abdel Salam Taha was later pronounced dead in hospital.
As you can see, they gave a warning to the place and people left it. Our hearts are dead. We are living without feelings and without a soul. Every day we face these things, wherever we face these things. When it comes to us, we're done. There is no ceasefire. There is nothing. There is nothing. Our lives are destroyed. Our youth are destroyed. What can we do? We want solutions. We want to live in peace. This does not make sense. This does not make sense. It's true these things are happening to other people, but I am also human. I see these things. People torn into pieces. We die. Our morale is destroyed.
The second strike hit the nearby Nuseirat refugee camp. The Israeli military said it was investigating both strikes. The military also said a senior Hamas member, Sharif al-Hasnat, was killed in the city of Deir al-Balah. Israel says he was leading efforts to restore Hamas's underground infrastructure. Hamas has accused Israel of violating the ceasefire. The group also accused Israel of undermining U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to end the Gaza conflict. According to Gaza health officials, more than 1,280 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire took effect last October. The Israeli military says 4 of its soldiers have been killed during the same period.
Now, Greek authorities have transferred around 420 migrants from Crete to the island of Lesbos and Samos. On Sunday, around 220 migrants were taken to Lesbos and another 200 to Samos. Greece's migration ministry said the transfers were to carry out checks and complete border procedures and would be temporary. Authorities said the facilities on these 2 islands currently had low occupancy after more than 4,700 people were moved to other facilities this year. Crete currently has a temporary migrant facility in Chania. Work is also continuing on a second facility in Heraklion. Now, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met Jordanian Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi in Beijing on Sunday. Wang said he was confident the Jordanian King Abdullah II's visit to China would be a success. China praised Jordan's support for the One China principle and said it would continue to back Jordan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Beijing also supports Oman's role on the Palestinian issue and other regional matters. Safadi said Jordan wants to deepen cooperation with China and praised Beijing's support for a 2-state solution to the Palestinian issue. Now, European Union firefighters have joined efforts to contain a wildfire in Serbia's region. Belgrade activated the EU civil protection mechanism on Friday as the blaze continued to spread. The flames have burned thousands of hectares of forest around 80 kilometers from the capital. Serbian authorities say Romania, Slovakia and the Czech Republic have sent 4 Black Hawk firefighting helicopters. Germany and Romania are providing a total of 124 firefighters and 39 vehicles. Russia has also joined the operation. President Alexander Vučić said the firefighters had managed to protect people's lives and homes. All right, after the break, we'll have more stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to Way News. Now, Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan are taking their strategic partnership to a new level. It's after President Ilham Aliyev's state visit to Tashkent brought a new treaty on eternal friendship and fresh plans to boost trade, investment and regional connectivity.
Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev held talks in Tashkent on Sunday during Aliyev's state visit to Uzbekistan, setting new targets for trade, investment and regional cooperation. The 2 leaders met at the Kuksaroy state residence following an official welcome ceremony. Speaking at the 3rd meeting of the Supreme Interstate Council, Mirziyoyev said relations between Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan had reached a historic high.
I have been informed that out of $500 million, approximately $160 million have already been allocated. Naturally, I believe we will utilize these funds soon and define new avenues of cooperation. I must also mention that Azerbaijan has such formats of cooperation with various countries. However, I would say that the most efficient and results-oriented fund is precisely the Uzbekistan-Azerbaijan Investment Fund.
The 2 presidents signed a treaty on eternal friendship, further strengthening ties between the 2 countries. The leaders adopted a roadmap aimed at raising annual bilateral trade to $1 billion. Mirziyoyev said trade between the 2 countries had tripled over the past 5 years.
В основе наших отношений лежит единый цивилизационный код, At the heart of our relations lies a shared civilizational code, common historical roots, centuries-old friendship, unbreakable spiritual values, and similar culture and traditions. It is this deep-rooted bond that makes our relations solid and invulnerable to external conditions.
They also discussed expanding joint projects, with the current investment portfolio exceeding $5 billion across sectors including energy, industry, construction, agriculture and finance. Transport cooperation was also high on the agenda, including plans for a joint Caspian shipping fleet and expanded transit routes.
Now, Afghanistan's authorities say they will not allow their territory to be used against neighboring Tajikistan, following another deadly incident along the two countries' border. Tajik authorities say 2 Afghan nationals were killed after illegally crossing the frontier and becoming involved in an armed confrontation with border forces. Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
The Afghan government is playing down concerns of a wider confrontation with its neighbor Tajikistan. Afghanistan official spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid says recent activity along the border was linked to smuggling and was now under control. He says the incident didn't amount to military clashes or a serious security threat. Mujahid assured its neighbor that Afghan territory will not be allowed to be used against Tajikistan. His comments follow a statement from Tajikistan's State Committee for National Security, which says 2 Afghan nationals were killed after allegedly illegally entering Tajik territory. Tajik authorities accuse the men of drug trafficking and say they resisted border forces. Officials say weapons and around 17 kilograms of hashish were recovered. The incident comes amid heightened security concerns along the more than 1,300-kilometer border between the two countries. Earlier this month, a woman was killed in Tajikistan by gunfire linked to fighting on the Afghan side of the border, prompting a formal protest from the capital, Dushanbe. Meanwhile, Tajik authorities have also reported several armed encounters with suspected Afghan drug smugglers this year. So, while Kabul says the latest incident is under control, cross-border trafficking and the risk of further armed incidents remain significant concerns for Tajikistan. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, News.
Now, Kazakhstan's first vote for its new parliament has produced a strong early lead for the pro-presidential Adalet party as the country prepares for a major change to its political system. Farza Kalamazina has the details.
5 political parties are projected to enter Kazakhstan's new Kurultai, according to preliminary results released by the Central Election Commission. Adalet is leading with nearly 72% of the vote, far ahead of the other parties. Adalet is a new pro-presidential party formed earlier this year. It was later joined by Amanat, previously Kazakhstan's largest political party. Parties need at least 5% of the vote to enter parliament. Turnout was just over 74%, with more than 9.3 million people voting. There are still preliminary figures. The Central Election Commission is expected to announce the final results within 10 days of the vote. Meanwhile, international observers described the Kurultai elections as fair and open, saying they found no violations that could have affected their results. The Kurultai will have 145 lawmakers elected through party lists for 5-year terms. But this election is about more than a new parliament. Kazakhstan is also changing the structure of its political system. The previous 2-chamber parliament is being replaced by a single-chamber Kurultai, which will have a greater role in key government decisions and in holding the government to account. The new Kurultai will have a bigger say in key appointments, including the Prime Minister, Vice President, and members of the Constitutional Court. It will also have stronger powers to oversee the government, including the ability to express no confidence in individual ministers. That makes the role of the Speaker particularly important, as legislative power will now be concentrated in a single chamber. And once the Kurultai begins its work, the current government must step down within 2 months of the first session. The president must also appoint the vice president, a position restored under the amended constitution with the parliament's approval. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A News.
All right, that's the news for this hour. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.